decisions with OpenSIPS. And my last presentation had was called Making Business Decisions with OpenSIPS, and the question was what is a business decision? I think there's no real answer for what is a routing decision. But I guess every kind of business and user would have their own definition of what their own decisions are, and it kind of got me thinking, well, if you want to make your own decisions within your own business and do your own thing, then you really don't want to be constrained by the software that you're using. You don't want to take a piece of software that's going to force you to operate within its constraints. You really need something like OpenSIPS that will give you the flexibility to make those decisions and to really kind of have the power to do what you need to do. And this presentation will take you through some of the things that you'll be able to do with OpenSIPS to help you make those decisions. Be an introduction to some of the features and modules of OpenSIPS, an example of how all the features can come together, as it says, in a powerful way, and some decision making. So this is the example scenario we're going to work through. First of all, as some of you may be very familiar with how to do this already, we want to authenticate a call using its IP address. We then want to look up the user and find the user preferences. And then we want to see if we can make any external requests for the call. For example, any requests outside of OpenSIPS to get some more information. And then we'll route the call to a carrier based on the prefix and also deal with any failures that might happen along the route. Okay, so step one is to authenticate by IP. And OpenSIPS has something called the permissions module. So out of the box, as it were, the permissions module will let you define IP addresses, define ports, define protocol types, define ranges of IP addresses, and then you can do simple checks against these IPs and ports and ranges, and basically say, is this call coming from a known IP? If it is, then basically we allow the call in. It's relatively simple. But one of the quite useful features of this module is it allows you to store context information. So you can very quickly say initially, yes, I would like to accept this call, and then immediately OpenSIPS will present you, in this example in the AVP info here, with the context information, so you've immediately got the information available to you in the script. You've not had to do any external requests, make any external lookups. Kind of one of the nice features of this module is that it's giving you the information to work with straight away. And then with this information, you can use the string selection functions within OpenSIPS. So you can select the 0th index, and basically we know that's the user ID. The first index, we know this is to signify the account is active. And the second index is kind of an arbitrary number which is telling us what this user would like their max spend to be. So, it's all in memory, it's very fast, it's a lookup you're going to do anyway, and you've immediately been able to find out all this information about the call that you're about to route. So that was fairly simple. The next thing we need to do is look up the user and find some user preferences. Now, there are lots and lots of ways of doing this in OpenSIPS, but I thought it would be a nice way to demonstrate how you could use a dial plan module to store variables and do some lookups. So we already know the user ID from the permissions module. The account is active because the active variable was set to 1. And we've got this arbitrary variable, which is the maximum amount that the user will pay for a call. So now, to kind of take this presentation forwards, what I've said is we'll do a dip. We'll go out and make an external request and find some information about this call. So one of the things we want to do now is see whether this call actually needs us to make that external request and go and get that information. So we can use the dial plan module for this. And the nice thing about the OpenSIPS dial plan module is it kind of lets you do anything you want. Some other dial plan modules in other pieces of software are quite rigid. You know, they'll allow you to do a match, and then based on the match, you must perform a number of actions, and that's kind. And if you want to do anything more complex, you have to get quite involved. Whereas the OpenSIPS dial plan module, I find very useful because you can simply just use it to translate one string into another string, or just do a very, very quick check or a very quick lookup for some information that you might need. Again, like the permissions module, it holds its information in a database table. Here's a small example. You have a dial plan ID here of 10. There's a match operation of 0, which means that OpenSIPS is going to do an exact match on the match exp column. And once again, we have this concept of attributes which are stored against the module, which OpenSIPS can return back to you as part of a check against this dial plan. So here we will do a dial plan lookup. We see we have the user ID, which we got from the permissions modules before. We know we want to look for the user's preferences, so we build ourselves a string, which is var dp match, and then we can simply call the dial plan translate function with a dial plan match variable. And the key thing we're after here is that OpenSIPS will return true if there's a match, and if there is a match, we'll also get the attributes that we need once again in this var attributes. And yeah, so that's the example of the exact match, which is this is the example that we want to use for this presentation. It's also much more powerful than that. If you noticed the /var foo, what OpenSIPS will do is, if you have a replacement that you would like to do, it will give you the replacement back in another variable. So, and this is a completely unrelated example. We have dial plan ID 11. Match operation is 1, which means OpenSIPS will do a regular expression check. We have a match expression. OpenSIPS will check to see whether a string starts with 01226. A substitution expression. If the match expression matches, OpenSIPS can then go on and perform the substitution expression, which will give us the variables \1. And then we get the replacement expression out, which is the 0 removed and the 4 replaced. So it can be used to do very, very fast string replaces as well. And again, with pulling the attributes out, it's all in memory, it's all extremely fast, and it saves you having to do what you might traditionally think is some kind of external request into another application to get the information that you need. So, to the original dial plan result, we pulled the attributes out. So, the information we were after was whether we need to do an external dip or external request for this call. These attributes say yes, we do. And we've got some more arbitrary information which will be useful later on in the presentation, which tells us that this user would like to use tariff number 11 when we go on to read the code later. And like we had the string select function before, you can see you can actually extract the dip and the tariff values very easily using the inbuilt parameter match function in OpenSIPS. If you have any string in OpenSIPS which is separated by a semicolon, and then you have key value pairs on each side, then OpenSIPS can very easily pull the values out using the param.value functions here. So we've got, again, a very fast and very easy way to extract those values and make them useful. Okay, so now we know we need to do the external dip. As we said, here we have the dip equals 1 value, and the user uses tariff 11. So now we can move on to step 3, which is to actually make the external request. Now, the previous two examples, which were the permissions module and the dial plan module, have all been kind of internal OpenSIPS operations. We've used some OpenSIPS modules. We've allowed them to form a normal function, and we've also used them to give us some extra information that we need about the call that we're routing right now. This is a slightly different example. It's an example of making an external request outside of the current OpenSIPS system to a third-party system, and it's something that's often done when routing calls in the USA. When you route a call in the USA, the number that you're actually sending the call to is not necessarily the number that you would like to route the call to. If the number's been ported, for example, you need to know that information, and you need to know which exchange that number's been ported to. So in this example, what we would need to do is do what's called an LRN dip. We have our OpenSIPS server on the left, and OpenSIPS would need to actually send, basically proxy the request onwards to a dip server, and then receive a known failure, a 302 response back, which will give the information about the LRN dip back to OpenSIPS. And the way this actually works is the 302 will be returned back to OpenSIPS, and there will be a routing number in the contact header that's returned. And once again, OpenSIPS, using the parameter value functions, can very easily pull out the routing number and store it in a variable for later use. So it's kind of like a third part to the routing script. You just go off and get this information, and thank you very much, we've got it, and now we're just going to store it in this variable, and we're slowly building up the list of variables that we need for each step in this call. Just as a quick overview, in case people are unfamiliar, when you make this external request, you simply would need to proxy the call as usual. And what OpenSIPS allows you to do is arm failure routes. So when we send this call to dip.dipserver.com, the OpenSIPS will then know that if it receives a failure, and it's an expected failure, we expect a 302 response, which is a failure, it will call the failure route as defined here, and that's the actual point at which OpenSIPS can then extract the routing number out of the contact header. And then you can continue routing. Just because we have a 302 response here, it doesn't mean that the entire original request needs to fail. We're in a failure route, but we can quite happily call root RTD routing, and that will just continue to execute the script. So actually what we've got here is OpenSIPS sending out the request, proxying the request, and 302 may get returned to a different OpenSIPS child process, and it knows where we are, and it can continue working. So as an overview, we managed to pull the user ID, whether the account is active, and the maximum spend from the permissions module lookup. We then used the dial plan to get the preferred tariff for the user, and whether the call should be dipped or not, and we did an LRN dip to get the routing number that we should really be routing this call to. And this kind of poses a small question. When we came into the failure route for the 302, how did the failure route already know about the old variables? In the request had left OpenSIPS and the response had come back, but we were still able to access the variables user ID, active, max spend, tariff, and dip from within that failure route. By default, OpenSIPS doesn't allow you to do this. It will, if you use the AVP variable type, they only persist for the duration of the message. But by setting a simple parameter, which is the on-reply AVP mode, you can allow those AVP variables to persist throughout the entire transaction. And it's useful to know, and it means you can do quite interesting and quite relatively powerful things like this, which is make multiple external requests. And when those requests come back, you still have the information that you had in the first place. And you can do some very good things with it. Okay, so step 4, we said we're going to route the call to a carrier. Obviously, naturally, within OpenSIPS, we would choose the dynamic routing module. Now, at its heart, the dynamic routing module is a longest match prefix module. So, if you're sending a call to prefix 4479, it will look in its configuration for the longest match it can get that will send the call to the 4479 prefix. And then it will resolve that prefix to a list of gateways or carriers that you tell it can deal with the call. And again, once again, there are attributes that you can use within this module. If you pull those attributes out and take advantage of them, you can do some very interesting things outside of the normal, just sending the call to the next carrier kind of scenario. So this is how the configuration may look within the dynamic routing module. You've got 4 carriers. The first carrier is BT, the second carrier is Vodafone, third carrier AT&T, and the fourth carrier is Verizon. And then what you can do is define lists of rules. So here we have group ID 11, which is important because we pull that in the permission module or the example module. The fact that the user would prefer to use group ID 11 for the call, for routing their calls. We have a prefix here, 447, which means any calls to a prefix starting 447 will go to gateway list 1 and then 2. Gateway 1 is BT and gateway 2 is Vodafone. So sort of out of the box, the default operation of this module will be to try BT first, and if that should fail, then send the call onwards to Vodafone. And then we have some attributes which we can use, I'm going to demonstrate how we can use later. Demonstrate what they mean now. So the list of attributes, 1,6, colon 2,4. The first set is 1,6. The 1 corresponds to the gateway, which is 1, which can be used as a check in the scripting later. And the 6 is, in this example, just going to refer to a price. It doesn't mean anything, it doesn't mean cost per minute. It's just for the purposes of this example, it's just a number we can do some comparisons against. So the price to send this call to BT is 6, and the price to send this call to Vodafone is 4. And we simply call do routing. The dynamic routing module does its job and selects a carrier using this function. So here we have the AVP tariff, which we know is 11 from the information we pulled out earlier. And then we have the rule attributes, which we would like to pull out so we can use it to make some further decision making. And out of the box, what OpenSIPS will have done is it will have loaded in the destination information for the first carrier. So it will have loaded in the destination information for BT. So if you then route that call out now, the call will go out automatically to the first carrier. So it's a nice module that just does everything for you in the background with a single function call and kind of follows the configuration that you've set up. But the nature and purpose of this presentation is to say you can do slightly different things if you want to. So what we can do is we can use the attributes and we can inspect the attributes and actually decide whether we would like to route the call or not. Excuse me. And here we have an example of what our routing script may look like. At the very top we have a route, RT routing. Now when the call failed, when we had the failure route from the LRN dip earlier, the next function call, or the next route call was RT routing, this is a kind of a pseudocode example of what this route may look like. So we call the do routing function, it gives us our first carrier, and as I said, if we just sent the call out now, it would automatically go to the first carrier. What we can actually do is, before sending the call out, we can actually do some checks, and we can use those attributes that we pulled out to get some information. So we have a while loop in here. Again, the OpenSIPS scripting configuration is very, very powerful. I think it's basically Turing-complete, so you can have loops, you can do recursion, you can do some very nice things with it while you're routing a call through the system. So we have a while loop here, and basically we're going to do a check on the cost. So what we can do here is we have the variable count, which is initialized to 0, and in the RT check cost route, we can then target the zeroth element of the rule attributes, which is 1,6, which is gateway 1, and the cost will be 6. We can then check to say if this cost is less than what the user is prepared to spend, then the cost is fine, otherwise it's not. If the cost is not fine, we go back into our while loop, and what we will do is we will tell the dynamic routing module to select the next gateway. So what we're actually doing here is we're discarding gateways based on some attributes that we've stored. We've decided we don't want to route the call to BT after all because it's going to cost more than the user's prepared to spend. Then we come to Vodafone. Vodafone will sell the call for 4 pence maybe. The user's prepared to pay 5 pence, so therefore we send the call to Vodafone. And it's a real nice way. In the presentation I've done previously, which went more in depth into this scenario than I have here, it's a real nice way to kind of implement least cost routing or any other kind of routing that you'd like to do using the dynamic routing module. You can pass in all kinds of information into the attributes columns and then use these kind of recursion features and call different routes and make lots of decisions about whether you actually want to use the gateway that's been chosen for you before you route the call. So just to conclude really, we've used a permissions module to retrieve account information. We've used a dial plan module to retrieve this DIP information and the tariff information. We've used attributes to our advantage many times. We've used persistent AVPs, so the variables are persisted throughout the transaction rather than just with a single message. And we've made external requests and continued routing. And you can make as many external requests as you like. You can just keep going and just keep using all the features of OpenSIPS and building up what you might need in order to complete the call you need to complete. And we've routed the calls of the carrier whilst making extra decisions. So while we've kind of just used the permission module to authenticate the call and we've just used the dial plan to do some lookups, and we've used the dynamic routing module, we've actually kind of combined quite a few extra bits of information in there to make the routing a bit more than just a load of OpenSIPS modules used out of the box to kind of do what they were doing in the documentation. So it demonstrates how flexible you can be. For a lot of the things in those examples, you could have used direct database lookups, which again involves you having to go to an external system. The beauty of many of the OpenSIPS modules is they allow you to store this information, and then they're essentially in memory, and the kind of the information is got for you for free automatically. You have looping and recursion as I explained before. You have almost Turing-complete routing script, and by not making external requests to databases and making external API calls, you can get very, very fast results without really spending lots and lots of money on hardware. So typically tens of thousands of calls per second just by taking advantage of all these features that OpenSIPS gives you. So that's it really. Any questions from anybody?
Nobody has a question?
I'm perplexed.
So there's a lot more information in there than kind of in the previous presentation. Yeah. Hope it made sense.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay.